In this day and age, people make light of being chained to their desk. Working 80-hour weeks is a badge of courage.
But what many of us don't acknowledge or want to talk about is the fact that overachieving may do more harm than good. Burning the midnight oil means burning the candle at both ends.
Being addicted to our jobs can lead to other addictions. It can lead to burnout, family problems, and for what? Today we are joined by Dr. Bryan Robinson, author of Chained to the Desk in a Hybrid World.
Bryan, welcome to Believe in People.
Thank you, Amy. It's great to be here.
Well, we're thrilled that you're here. Bryan, being a psychotherapist, you're an expert in work addiction recovery and writing extensively on work-life balance with your most recent book coming out soon, Chained to the Desk in a Hybrid World. What have your findings uncovered?
Well, I can't tell you what the findings have uncovered in the whole book, but in terms of the hybrid piece, we're not ever going back. It's hybrid is the way of the future, and that's pretty unanimous among most experts. And what that means is if someone is not working in an office and they're working at home, they have their personal life and their professional life under the same roof. And there's an advantage and disadvantage. Well, there are advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages is you have more flexibility in your day. If you want to take a kid to the doctor, or if you want to go to the gym and work out and then come back and do your work, you can. But the problem is you lose your boundaries. So there's chocolate cake in the fridge, there's laundry that needs to be done. The vacuuming maybe needs to be done, your dog needs to be walked. So the key about hybrid work is, as we know, the research shows that people are much more productive and more engaged, but you've got to have boundaries. You've got to have some kind of plan. Otherwise, it becomes a problem with work-life balance, a problem most of us didn't have before the pandemic.
I was going to
work-life balance, but we didn't have the problem with the hybrid issue before.
I was just going to say that so many people that I speak with say that they get so much more done in terms of work when they are at home. But what are you saying? People are getting more done, they're more productive, but at the expense of what? At the expense of their own lives, their own freedoms.
Right, because what's happening, not only are they getting more done, they're getting too much done because they're burning the midnight oil. And the burnout rate has skyrocketed as a result. That's one of the reasons the boundaries are so important. Is I always tell folks, pretend your office is 5 miles across town and go there only when you're going to be working. If you can. Now, everybody doesn't have a separate room for an office. Some people have to find a place where out of the flow of the traffic, but it's really the same thing we've been dealing with, and I've written other books about work addiction. Workaholics do not have boundaries. They work day and night, weekends, holidays, and I'm a prime example of that. I consider myself in recovery, and I used to not have boundaries at all. And I can tell you a few stories about that if you want. I'm going to leave that up to you, but the first step is knowing you need to have boundaries and time for self-care.
Yeah, and actually, thank you, Bryan. To that point, I'd love to hear a few stories because it really helps define how do you define yourself as a workaholic? Because some people don't identify with that, and yet they are. Love to hear that.
That's right. And a lot of people don't even believe there's any such thing. I've had colleagues that say that's just a pop term. There's no real such thing as workaholism. So to prove them wrong, when I was a professor at the University of North Carolina, I set out, because we had to publish or perish, but I just happened to be someone who loves to write. So I did the first study on children of workaholics and ended up being on 2020 because nobody had ever even looked at it before, because what's the problem if you're working? I mean, that's a good thing. And we know that children of workaholics have higher anxiety, They have what we call an external locus of control, which means they're more chameleons, and they're willing to turn themselves into a pretzel for someone else. And they have greater depression. I also did the first study on marriage and the effects of workaholism on marriage. Can you believe that? This was 2024. No one had ever done any studies looking at the problems of workaholism because it had been so extolled. And what we know, the divorce rate's 40% higher. People who live with a workaholic, a spouse or partner, have more marital conflict and discord, and are obviously at more risk for divorce than those who don't. So I did those studies, and also at the same time, while I was doing these studies, was going on vacation with my family and friends, and we would get a big house, and they would say, let's go walk on the beach. And I would pretend I was going to rest and yawn, and they would go, and I would watch. This is going to sound really sick because it was, and it does to me now. Once they were out of sight, I would pull out my project. I had to bootleg it anyway because my spouse refused to allow me to take work. But I was so desperate, I took it where I'd hidden it, pulled out a makeshift board as a desk, and feverishly worked on whatever the university project was or the publication in order to get it done. And then when I heard them coming back, I immediately put it away and lay down on the bed and pretend I'd been sleeping.
Mm-hmm. Is there, this is a two-pronged question. Is this unique to us in North America? Is it more prevalent here? And the second prong, do we do it out of fear? Do we do it out of fear of losing our jobs, losing our livelihood, losing our lifestyle?
It's not unique to us. I would say that just based on the way our culture is in North America, we tend to have more work addiction historically, but that's changing. It's happening now all over the world. The Japanese have a term for death from overwork because work addiction kills. Overworking kills. It's that simple. It creates health problems and it kills. We don't have that language in our vernacular, and I think there's a reason for it because I don't want to get into the politics of it, but the Japanese do, and they call it karoshi, and it's from the throngs of mostly men. It's starting to be more women who die at their desk in their 40s from working morning till night. They're called 7-Eleven husbands in Japan. We're starting to see that trend now all over the world, where people are having more not only physical problems but also psychological problems from overworking. To get to your next question, out of yes, sometimes fear of the job, Kevin, or fear of not being able to stay employed, but it goes a little deeper than that. And I've been doing this research for 20 years, empirically and clinically and anecdotally. And what I have found in the case studies is most true workaholics have a history of what we call parentification. And I know I did or do. Parentification is when you're a kid and you are catapulted into the adult world without the emotional construction. And when that happens, there's something called GIA. It's global high intensity activation that hits us, and we don't have the emotional scaffolding to deal with it. We don't even know what's going on, but it creates anxiety. Many workaholics have anxiety, and when you're working, and this is true of me, when I was working, the anxiety, the work assuaged my anxiety. I remember there was one point at the university when I had a whole weekend empty. Now, most people would say, well, I can't wait. I was terrified. Now, this has been 20 years ago. I was terrified. So I found a call for grants, and I remember folding that computer printout under my arm, just like an alcoholic putting a bottle under his arm, and how calm I felt that I knew what I'd be doing that weekend. And that comes from a certainty. And uncertainty, we know there's tons of data on this, creates anxiety. So many workaholics either are coming from a place of anxiety, and if you're afraid of losing your job, of course, that's going to exacerbate anxiety that you're bringing anyway. And there's some who are using it to feel better about who they are. Most of these problems, just like alcoholism, come from dysfunctional childhoods. I grew up in an alcoholic family, and many of the people that I've seen grow up in either alcoholic families or workaholic families, or there's some type of dysfunction which causes them to latch on to schoolwork, homework, caretaking of a younger sibling, to as a coping mechanism for the anxiety, because they're swimming around in a sea of imbalance and uncertainty.
And Bryan, to your point, that's fascinating about your childhood and those who really don't understand the trauma and or triggers.
Yeah.
Because I imagine that when you mentioned the story about when you were resting but you did work, then wouldn't you have thought that if you didn't do the work you'd have even greater anxiety? So how do you cope with that?
Oh, yeah.
Like, how do you transition to that?
Well, you're right. That would, I mean, not having an opportunity to do it, I would be white knuckling it or drumming my fingers, or be irritable with people, just like an alcoholic withdrawing from booze or a drug addict coming off a drug. People don't realize the similarities between work addiction, which I prefer to call it because it really gives the name a legitimate, the problematic part of it, because so many people think workaholism is a good thing. But yes, and then now, what was the second part of that question? What is the option?
Yes,
Is that
exactly. Like,
well?
and how did you? What skills did you learn? Like, how did you then shift your way of being?
Well, I went to a treatment center with a family member who had alcoholism to help that person with their problem. And in most recovery centers, rehab centers, they have a family week. So I went to the family week, and this kind of reminds me of Ashley Judd, how she was kind of pinpointed when Winona went into recovery. That's what happened to me. And they said, you've got a problem. Uh, of course, I chuckled, and because I'm thinking I'm here for this person, I don't have a problem. And they helped me see, first of all, there's denial with work addiction, just like there is with any addiction. And that kind of got me going through the denial. And then my marriage started to, well, it fractured. And that was another wake up call. And during the separation, I felt like my life was, sliding through my fingers. And my colleagues, I was getting awards for the research I was doing and the books I was writing. I was promoted to full professor, tenured, but that didn't really matter to me at all. I just had to keep getting the next thing done. And I was snapping at colleagues and competing with colleagues, and I finally hit a bottom physically, in addition to my marriage breaking up. Although I'm back in that marriage now, and everything, we're living happily ever after so far. I just wanted to, in case I forget to say that. But it's hitting a bottom that wakes us up sometimes when we have an addiction. And I went into therapy. I started a Workaholics Anonymous group for the 12 steps, just like Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, I started, the thing that really put me on a different course of action. I got to tell you this story because it changed my life. Um, when I was teaching at the university about this time, we had 10 Tibetan monks come to perform on the campus. And I had started reading just a little bit about Buddhism. I didn't really understand it. But during their performance, or right before their performance, a group of religious fundamentalists assembled outside the auditorium with signs saying that Buddhists worship idols and they're the devil's work. And I was furious. It just infuriated me that these our visitors would be treated that way. So, but guess what they did? They held the show, these 10 monks, with smiles on their faces, They walked outside, joined hands with the demonstrators, and at that point they were singing Jesus Loves Me, and they sang Jesus Loves Me with them, and they disbanded. It blew me away, and I remember thinking, I want what they've got. Remember the movie When Harry Met Sally? And he talks about the woman in the room who is feigning the
It's a bit
orgasm.
of a
I want what she's having. So,
stretch there, Bryan, with the comparison, but I get you there.
well, actually, there is a comparison. There's something I call the C spot that I'd like to talk about. And a lot of people will say, that sounds a little bit like the G spot. And actually, they're not wrong, but the C spot is a psychological state of being, which I have discovered in my own personal journey. And when we're in that place, and that's kind of where the monks were, and it's where I wanted to be, and I am able to be there more often now, and that's why I'm not driven by it, I'm drawn by it, which is a different. Being driven is when either someone outside of you is requiring you to do certain things and you have the pressure, or you have that little voice in your head, and that's what workaholics have, that says you have to, you must, you should. We call that masturbation. And that's a clinical term, believe it or not. And we call that shouldy thinking. And we use those terms because once clients hear them, they'll always be aware when they're doing it. So I forgot where I was going, but the I forgot
The
the
C
question.
spot.
Sorry. Oh, the
It
C
was the
spot,
C
of
spot.
course. I need to get back in my C spot. When you're in your C spot, you're clear, you're confident, you're calm, you're creative, you are compassionate and courageous and curious and connected to people. Now, that's not an easy place to be 24/7, obviously, because we live in a world that keeps knocking us out of it. That's why most of us can't be there. But that's what I aspire to be, not perfect, but to live more from my center, that C place, than from what we call parts. Dick Schwartz, who founded Internal Family Systems Therapy, talks about parts that blend with us or take over. Like my anger, whenever I watched these demonstrators treat these beautiful people the way they did, the anger is my part, and that eclipses who I really am, and eclipses my compassion and my love. But it didn't for them. They just were not at all reactive to the demonstrators, and that's still my goal. I'll never reach that goal, but it's something that I aspire to, and I try to live that in my life, and that really puts work in a different perspective for me.
Let me ask you about, Amy. Amy and I both come from Toronto.
Yeah,
There's a saying in Toronto where a lot of people say to themselves, "You've heard of Thank God it's Friday." Obviously, well,
yeah.
people in Toronto apparently say, "Thank God it's Monday." And my question to you would be, does workaholism actually help with your productivity?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, but let me tell you what I know. Um, in a way, it can make you productive, but because you're working a lot. But in a way, it undermines your ability to produce. There's some research that's been done at Rutgers showing that workaholics are often those in the workplace who create a crisis, and they are crisis oriented normally, and then they're the ones that put out the crisis. But when you really look underneath, they created it to begin with. And workaholic, if you've been
That's
a
so
workaholic,
true.
yeah,
That's
if
so
you've been a
true.
workaholic, if you've been a workaholic for a while, you're going to have health issues, and heart
Yeah.
problems. There's tons of whole body research on heart disease and type A personality and work addiction. So that undermines the your ability to have a long career. The trajectory of a workaholic obviously goes up, hits a peak, and then it drops drastically in your 40s. That's when the physical and psychological issues really take over.
And you're always, and to that point, Bryan, you are always combating this stigma around, having to perform and to be better than, and the competition and all of this language around getting things done and there isn't enough time. So we're not embracing that as a good thing. We're basically saying, no, great, do as much work as you can. So then how
Exactly.
does this systematic thinking, like, how do we unravel that where it's a little healthier for us? I think it's happening a little, but what's your take on
A
that?
little, a little. Well, that's been my goal, is to put a stigma on work addiction. Because there was none when I started the research. And my research actually shows the damage. And the book that I wrote, Chained to the Desk, in its 4th edition, also has tons of case studies with Alanis Morissette. I interviewed Jewel, Ariana Huffington, Milk, the music, incredible musician. Gosh, Dan Harris. I could go on and on.
Well,
Well-known
Alanis,
people. Aaron Brockovich.
didn't you speak to Alanis Morissette?
Yeah,
Yes.
he did.
Oh, more than once. I've spoken to her many times. Um, she she goes around telling people I saved her life. Um, and I know she's from Canada. She lives in LA now, or out that way. I won't say where, but I didn't save her life. She saved her life. But she openly will talk about her own work addiction. And I actually did an interview with her on her website, one of her podcasts on her website, her talking about her own work addiction. And it's very similar to mine. When you meet someone else like Gloria Steinem, when she called me once, the first thing she said to me is, I feel like I know you. And I didn't understand what she meant, but she had read my book, and her childhood of coming home and not knowing if her mom was going to be wandering the streets or sitting quietly sewing, that uncertainty and created anxiety. And work had become her way of stabilizing herself. And when she read my story, she knew on the outside it was different, but on the inside, people who grow up and are parentified feel like they've known each other all their life. And that's what she meant the first time we spoke. And Alanis, same, the connection between the two of us. And Ariana Huffington, who you may know, talks about the day that she fell after being so burned out and she broke her cheekbone and ended up passed out and ended up in a pool of blood. And that turned
Jeez.
her life around to creating Thrive Global, actually. So the good news is, those of us who've been through the hell of that, we come out the other side and we can just create. And here's where the creativity comes in. It's one of those C words, just incredible things. I will tell you, and I was thinking about this the other day, I am happier today and I'm older today than I've ever been in my life. I love my life. I'm not driven. I'm drawn. I do what I want to do, not what I have to do. One of the things I want to point out is, for people who are watching or listening, is there's some very simple little tools you can use that I share with people in my writing and when I talk. And it's called flip your perspective instead of flip your lid. So an example would be, I just got through writing an article for Forbes called Want to versus Have to. Now, that sounds like a very simple thing. I've always said this, that if I want to do something, I'm going to be more motivated to do it. I'm going to be drawn. If I have to do it because somebody says you have to, or you must, or you should, or if I have that voice in my head that is requiring me, if you think about it, that's oppositional. It's really adding pressure to yourself. So if you're faced with a task and if you think, I want to, even if you don't want to, is there something about it that you can get excited about? You're more motivated to do it, and you're more likely to complete whatever it is. That's data. I mean, we have research on that. The other thing I wanted to mention is, if we listen to the language we use of people who are out of balance with their work, you don't have to be a work addict to be out of balance, is listen to the words you use. Deadlines. What if we use lifelines? A lifeline would be, sure, I've got this date that I have to have this done, but on the way to that, I'm going to take care of myself. And that's where mindfulness comes in. Mindfulness as you're walking from the parking deck into your office, mindfulness as you're going to the printer. And what that means is you can do boxed breathing. You can listen to the sounds around you. I'd like to do that with you guys if you're open to it. But you don't have to be thinking about the future or the past. If you think about the present, you're going to move into your C spot because you're going to be calmer and clearer and have more energy, right? Then, what about your tall comings? Can you, Kevin? Can you tell me some of your tall comings?
I have no
I know
idea what that means.
Oh, that's good.
exactly.
Instead of shortcomings, your tall comings.
Exactly. Yeah,
I
it's a
love
word I
it. I
made up.
love it.
Well, I made it up, but again, it's flipping. Just if you flip that around, just think about what we know is we are hardwired with a negativity bias. That's
Ah,
neuroscience. We're hardwired
Yeah.
for it. So we tend, positivity has a shorter shelf life. So if I know that my brain, like everybody's brain, tends to fall on more the negative, then I can start to think about, okay, now I can tell you my shortcomings in a heartbeat, one after
yeah.
another, but what are my tall comings, right? And then people will pause when I ask them to do this, and they have to think for a little bit. That's an example of our internal system and how we have been conditioned to think about who we are in the world. If we start to practice really thinking about what are my tall comings, throw modesty out the window. I'm smart, I'm capable, I'm creative, I'm compassionate, I'm funny, people like to be with me. Whatever they are, you start to see yourself in a more balanced way, and you start to live more from your C spot. So if you see yourself in a more balanced way, you're going to live your life in a more balanced way. This is what work-life balance is really about. It's not about playing more or getting a hobby. Well, I won't say what that is. That's elementary. It doesn't really even match what the science is saying today. Work-life balance is about gas and brakes. You got to have gas to get out of the driveway, but if you have the brakes on, you can't get out of the driveway. So you need both at the same time. The gas is the sympathetic nervous system. That's what helps us get things done. Brakes is the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's the rest and digest response. We got to have both, and if you don't have both, you're not going to live a life. Your external life will manifest the way your internal system is designed or the way it's configured. But you can unconfigure that. Another thing I talk about is a to-be list instead of a to-do list. Well, it's okay to have a to-do list, but have a to-be list alongside of it. And again, most people go blank. An example of that, I live in the mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I have an incredible view in front of me. I watch the sunsets every night this time of year. They're stunning. And there was a John Muir, the poet, once said, "I'm in the mountains and the mountains are in me." And every time
Mm.
I sit and I watch, I think, I feel that, I feel it inside. I feel my C spot. And that's calming, and it's exciting. It's the research at Berkeley, they call these awe moments, AWE. Everybody should be having awe moments once in a
Yeah.
while.
Good point. So,
You
so
know,
true.
just before we close off, every week, I was going to say something about millennials there because everyone's complaining about millennials and the fact that they want to have their own space and all these things, which perhaps gives us hope for the future, which
Yeah.
perhaps leads me into the question we ask our guest every week, and that is, why do you, Bryan, believe in people?
I think it's our relationships, our connections. That's another one of those C words that makes life meaningful. And I think when we're isolated or disconnected, uh, it increases our mental health issues, whether we already have anxiety or depression. Uh, for me, the connection with people is everything. I don't want to brag about myself. I don't want to sound like this is my ego speaking, because I don't think it is. I think it's my C spot. But my New Year's resolution was to do one kind thing a day for someone I know, but especially someone I don't know.
Hmm.
And it has been, I bought groceries for a woman in front of me the other day whom I thought might not, have the means that I have. And she started crying and shaking her head and couldn't believe it. And it wasn't that much money. And I told her, I said, "You're giving me more than I'm giving you, honestly." Um, I've done other things that are not financially based, some of which is just telling someone how brilliant they are or how much I've learned from them. So there are many ways to do it, but that invigorates me, that energizes me, and it gives me a sense of meaning and purpose in my own life. But it's that connection, and the connection comes from, for me at least, has come from my ability to understand I don't have to be living in that addictive place. I can live in this other place that I call the C spot, and I'm going to be happier, more productive, and be more connected to people and find more meaning and purpose in my life.
And Bryan, to that point, you actually have brought that to us and our viewers and listeners today, because you've come with a very interesting and perspective that we can actually action. And I love that. We love the C spot and the fact that that's what work-life balance is really all about, because you've really defined it in a way that's so meaningful. So grateful. Thank you, Bryan. We could talk all day, and we'd love to next time to learn your exercise. But for now, thank
Okay.
you so much for your time.
You're so welcome. Thank you
Thank you,
both.
Bryan.
Kevin, thank you. It's great meeting you.
Thanks. Well, of course, one of the C words that Bryan was talking about that perhaps we could all discover, and that is the word calm. And just talking to him was so calming, and seeing a new perspective, especially in the daily grind that so many people now live within their own households. A very beneficial conversation.
I agree, Kevin. And one thing that really struck me was, rather than being driven towards something, be drawn to it. And there's kind of a calming, purposeful message in that. And if you want more and learn more about this, the great understanding of workaholism and recovery, and just where you are with your work-life balance, read Bryan's book, Chained to the Desk in a Hybrid World, and that will be released. And we hope you enjoy it. And if you've enjoyed this episode and want to learn more, experience more, and tap into the knowledge that we receive from guests, please subscribe to Believe in People. Thank you so much.
Stay calm.